There is a particular kind of person you don't recognize until it's already over. Not because they were hiding, but because everything they did felt like exactly what you needed. The attention felt like care. The interest felt like connection. The pace felt like passion. And by the time something in you began to shift, some slow, quiet unease you couldn't name, you had already handed them access to your time, your trust, your self-concept. The thing people almost never want to admit is that predatory behavior rarely announces itself through cruelty. It announces itself through precision, through someone who studied what you needed and gave it to you in the exact right dose, at the exact right moment, until you stopped questioning whether any of it was real. This video is not a warning. It's a recognition. These are the 7 signs of predatory behavior that most people never catch, not because they're hidden, but because they feel, until they don't, like something else entirely. The first sign isn't cruelty, it's the opposite. It's warmth. Sudden, specific, overwhelming warmth. The kind that arrives before you've done anything to deserve it. Predatory behavior almost always begins with what feels like recognition. Someone seeing you, naming something in you, reflecting back a version of yourself that you've always quietly suspected was there. They tell you you're different, that you're rare, that most people don't think the way you do. And because a part of you already believed this, because a part of you has always felt slightly out of place in ordinary company, it lands hard. What's actually happening in that moment isn't connection, it's calibration. They found the wound, the part of you that has spent years waiting to be seen, and they pressed exactly there, not because they know you, because they know the pattern. The speed of the intimacy is the signal. Real connection builds. Predatory intimacy arrives fully formed, because it isn't built from knowing you. It's constructed from knowing what people like you need to hear. Most people assume predatory behavior is impulsive, opportunistic, reactive. It isn't. What distinguishes truly skilled predatory behavior from ordinary manipulation is the reconnaissance phase, the period before they move, when they are watching without appearing to watch. They ask questions that seem like curiosity, but are actually data collection. They remember things you mentioned once, offhand, without emphasis, and surface them later at a moment designed to make you feel deeply numb. They note what makes you light up, what makes you withdraw, what you're most afraid of being seen as. They identify your social dynamics, who you trust, who you've lost, where you're isolated. This is not paranoia. This is pattern recognition. If someone seems to know you faster than the timeline of your interaction should allow, if they anticipate your reactions with uncanny accuracy before they have any real reason to, that accuracy is not chemistry. Chemistry is mutual and uneven. What they're demonstrating is preparation. This is the sign that causes the most damage. Not because it happens suddenly, but because it happens slowly. Through a shift so gradual you don't notice the direction of the conversation changing. You express hesitation. You draw a boundary, maybe not even explicitly, maybe just through a pause, a pulled back energy, a question that implies doubt. And in response, they don't adjust. They reframe. Your caution becomes your damage. Your resistance becomes your fear. Your boundary becomes evidence of past trauma that you haven't processed. They don't say these things harshly. They say them with compassion, with patience, with the gentle language of someone who claims to want to help you grow. But the architecture of what they're doing is precise. They are making your self-protection feel like self-sabotage. Once they've installed that frame, you stop trusting your own instincts. And when you stop trusting your instincts, you start deferring to theirs. That's not healing. That's transfer of authority from you to them. Predatory dynamics require compression. The longer you have to think, to compare, to step outside the emotional field they've constructed, the more likely you are to see clearly. So they collapse the timeline, not through overt pressure, through subtler mechanisms. They become unavailable right after you've become invested. They create moments that feel like they could disappear. Opportunities, connections, feelings that require you to act now, or risk losing them. They make your hesitation feel like a choice against them. They introduce instability at the exact moment you become attached enough to feel it as loss. The urgency is the manipulation. Real connection doesn't require you to decide before you're ready. Real connection doesn't punish you for needing time. What urgency does in a predatory dynamic is prevent evaluation. It keeps you operating in the emotional register rather than the observational one. Because the moment you observe with distance, the pattern becomes visible. This sign is the most misread because it looks like the opposite of what it is. Isolation is typically framed as someone cutting you off from the people in your life, removing access, creating distance. But sophisticated predatory behavior doesn't isolate you from your world. It makes itself your world. Slowly, the time you would have spent with others gets absorbed, not because they demand it, because being with them is so consuming, so intense, so full, that everything else starts to feel like a distraction. Your other relationships begin to atrophy not through confrontation but through neglect, through the gravitational pull of this one person. And then comes the quiet commentary. They don't attack your relationships directly. They introduce small doubts, observations about how your friends don't really understand you, how your family means well but can't see who you actually are, how this, what's between the two of you, is something others couldn't comprehend anyway. By the time the isolation is complete, it doesn't feel like it was done to you. It feels like a conclusion you reached on your own. Before a predatory person makes a significant move, they test. Not obviously. Not in a way you'd recognize as a test in the moment. They push a small boundary. They ignore something you said. They take a liberty you didn't grant, something minor enough that calling it out would feel disproportionate. Neurotic, ungrateful. They're watching to see whether you correct them. And if you don't, if you smooth it over, accommodate it, tell yourself it wasn't a big deal, they file that information. Then they push again, a little further. The violations escalate in increments small enough that there's never a clear moment where you can point to the line being crossed, because the line has been moved so gradually you've lost track of where it was. This is not accident. This is a calibration process. They're learning the architecture of your tolerance, your tendency to self-doubt, your threshold for confrontation. The answer to a test is not to pass it. It's to recognize that the test was being administered. The final sign is often the one that delivers clarity late and expensively. Predatory relationships are extractive by design. They are organized around something the predator needs from you. Status, resources, emotional supply, access, validation, the feeling of control. And when that supply shifts, when you're depleted, when you're in crisis, when you've set a limit that reduces their access, something changes. The warmth that once felt constant becomes conditional. The attention becomes intermittent. They're suddenly busy, suddenly distant, suddenly confused about what you want. You find yourself working to restore what had felt effortless before. What you're experiencing in that moment is the scaffolding becoming visible. The architecture of the dynamic was always transactional, and transactions require a commodity. When you stopped providing it, the relationship revealed what it was made of, which was never you. It was always what you could be made to give. None of these signs are obvious in isolation. That's the design. Predatory behavior is architected to feel, in every individual moment, like something explicable, something benign. The intensity is just chemistry. The urgency is just fear of losing something real. The boundary erosion is just a sign you both need to communicate better. The isolation is just a deep connection. The disappearance is just a rough patch. It is only when you hold all 7 together, as a pattern, not a collection of moments, that the structure becomes legible. And that legibility is not something that requires you to become cynical. It requires you to become precise, to trust the quiet accumulation of your own data about a person, to allow the pattern to mean something before you explain it away. The most dangerous thing about predatory behavior is not that it hurts you. It's that it teaches you to doubt your own perception. And the moment your perception is yours again, intact, trusted, unmediated, it loses all of its power.